I actually did an anthropology degree and an honours in anthropology, and coming out I did some very sort of generic work as a researcher and writer, and one of the jobs that I got was a writing job in climate change. And I spent a long time exploring and writing copy about climate change and was completely horrified with what I discovered in terms of species loss as a result of climate change, and also kind of the pressures of global change and climate change and what that was going to do to human beings, which is my kind of core interest. And so I began to work in the environmental sector, and from there I decided to upskill myself and do my master's and become a qualified biodiversity climate change specialist. My research project is a master's by dissertation project looking at climate-related decision-making amongst commercial bee farmers in the Western Cape. And the reason this is really relevant to biodiversity specifically is because of the links between commercial agriculture and biodiversity in the Western Cape are very critical. It's a very critical relationship of interdependency, in that the bee farmers are using their bees to pollinate crops like seed crops and fruit crops, and the bees are really struggling with that pollination process. It's quite hard on them, and a lot of bees die out during that process. And then the bees that survive that process need to be sustained by the natural biodiversity, the floral kingdom that's available in the Western Cape, so like the fynbos, and then also alien trees like gum trees, eucalyptus trees. So there's a really interesting relationship between commerce and biodiversity. And so understanding that relationship and understanding where does climate change fit into that relationship, and where do some of the other stressful things that are happening to bee farmers fit into that relationship, I think is critical for engaging with practitioners like farmers, and also just engaging with, more theoretically, the idea of biodiversity and how do we engage with biodiversity at an academic level as well. It raises questions about agriculture more generally, and looking at linkages between sensitive and vulnerable industries like bee farming, and there's plenty of other really, really sensitive industries as well. So I think a case study, an in-depth case study approach to looking at issues of biodiversity is very valuable, in that it gives us an in-depth insight rather than a kind of glossed overview. And then from that in-depth insight we can draw parallels between other case studies that have been done elsewhere in the world and in the country. Where I would like to make a contribution specifically is in raising food security as an issue from what is currently at the absolute bottom of the media's reporting apparently very little on food security, we learned in a presentation yesterday, and to really raise the profile of that. I think it's kind of got lost in energy debates and more mining and kind of very commercial dominated debates, and I think that food security as an issue really needs to be brought to the top of our agenda publicly. And I think researchers and academics have a huge responsibility in there's beautiful and wonderful and exciting research being done on food security, and the links between food security and biodiversity, and the food security and climate change. And I think our job is now to actually take that information and make it accessible within the public sphere and bridge the science-society gap that sometimes occurs. And I hope over the next 10 years that I'll be a part of communicating that information, communicating this exciting research that's going on in academia and making it applicable in multiple sort of non-academic spheres. The way that I see myself giving back to the sector that I work in is by bringing my research, the results of my research and the insights that I've gained through my research back into my research group, which is the Climate Systems Analysis Group, which is a multidisciplinary group where programmers work besides adaptation specialists. And so by having these conversations we can really advance in the area of climate change adaptation specifically. I also would like to disseminate my research outside of that particular academic network and to other academic networks. For example, organizations like SANBI, who are doing research on bees and biodiversity, might benefit from some of the in-depth kind of ethnographic work that I've done. So in terms of my community that I'd like to bring back, contribute with my work, I've decided to become a mentor. I'd really like to support other aspiring biodiversity practitioners, and I think the way that I can support them is by sharing something of my journey with them and some of the kind of challenges that I've faced and how I overcame those challenges, and kind of giving some feedback around maybe challenges that they're facing as they develop themselves. Having achieved the qualification, that stands me in good stead to be in a position of leadership within my field. I'm unsure at the moment if that means leaving with an MA or if I should continue to get a PhD, so that's something that I'm grappling with at the moment. If I get a PhD, I'll probably have one foot in academia and research, and I'd really like to have one foot in applied work. And specifically what I'd like to do in applied work is to become a qualified facilitator, as well as a trainer. That's something that I have a passion for. So I think that it's my communication skills and my leadership skills and my research skills, somehow I'd like to triangulate those in a role that has a specific input in the biodiversity sector.